I never thought my marriage would unravel the way it did. When I married Vanessa, I truly believed we were building a life together. We didn't have kids, but that was always by choice, our choice. It left us free to explore the world, pursue careers, and spend evenings, and I never thought my marriage would unravel the way it did. When I married Vanessa, I truly believed we were building a life together. We didn't have kids, but that was always by choice, our choice. It left us free to explore the world, pursue careers, and spend evenings in the quiet rhythm of each other's company. Or so I thought. Vanessa started using a rideshare app almost exclusively a few months ago. At first, it didn't seem odd. She doesn't like driving in the city, and we talked about being more eco-conscious. She began praising this one driver, Adam, a little too often. At dinner, she'd casually mention how funny or insightful he was, or how he always knew the fastest routes. "You should meet him," she said once, laughing over her wine. "You'd love him." I nodded absent-mindedly, brushing it off as harmless chatter. But their interactions grew frequent. Vanessa started taking rides with Adam to places that didn't require rides at all. Quick trips to the store, a lunch meeting downtown. When I asked why, she'd snap, "I enjoy the company. Is that a crime?" Her defensiveness should have been my first clue. I let it slide, convincing myself that Vanessa was just being her usual social self. Then came the changes in her routine. She began coming home later, claiming work was piling up. I believed her because, honestly, why wouldn't I? She was my wife. And yet, there were little inconsistencies. A lipstick stain left on her wine glass one evening didn't match the nude color she wore to work. She'd text on her phone, a soft smile tugging at her lips, then quickly locked the screen when I walked into the room. I told myself it was nothing. I trusted her. I was a fool. It wasn't until she left her phone on the kitchen counter one evening, her guard temporarily lowered, that I saw his name. Adam. Their texts were friendly, at least on the surface. But there was an intimacy in her tone, a teasing lightness that had been absent in our own conversations for months. It still wasn't enough to make me suspicious. Not really. Until the night she came home late, wearing perfume I didn't recognize. I asked where she'd been. "With some girlfriends," she said curtly. "Why do you care so much all of a sudden?" The edge in her voice sliced through me. I cared because I was her husband. I cared because I wanted to believe her. But doubt had been planted. I should have let it go. I should have ignored the nagging voice in my head that whispered Vanessa wasn't telling me the whole truth. But something inside me, a gut instinct perhaps, refused to let her odd behavior slide. A week after her late night and dismissive comment, I noticed a charge on our credit card statement. A small coffee shop downtown that neither of us ever frequented. I asked her about it casually while we were watching TV. "Oh, that," she said, barely glancing up from her phone. "I met Amanda there. You know, from yoga class." I didn't know Amanda. Vanessa never mentioned her before. "She doesn't drink coffee," I pointed out. She blinked, her lips parting slightly as though caught off guard. But Vanessa was quick on her feet. "She's trying it again." Her whole no caffeine thing got boring. Her laugh sounded forced. I didn't press further, but that nagging feeling tightened its grip. Later that week, Vanessa told me she'd be home late again. "A networking dinner," she said, kissing me on the cheek as she slipped out the door. She was dressed beautifully, in a fitted dress she hadn't worn in months. It made her look stunning, which only worsened the knot in my stomach. I went to bed without her that night. The next morning, she was already awake, showered, and chipper as if the previous evening had been perfectly uneventful. But it was during breakfast that her phone buzzed on the counter. She had always been cautious about keeping it close, but this time, she was in the other room. My eyes flicked to the screen. "Adam, last night was amazing. Can't wait until next time." My heart sank. My pulse thudded in my ears. I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself that I was overreacting. Maybe they talked about something innocent. Maybe, just maybe, I was the crazy one. When she returned, I mentioned the text. "Oh, it's from your rideshare driver. He said last night was amazing." "What's that about?" She froze. Just for a second. Her response was too quick, too practiced. "He helped me with the route to the dinner. There was traffic, so we chatted while he waited outside." She smiled, smirked, and added, "Are you jealous of a driver, babe?" I didn't answer, but my silence must have unnerved her because she snapped, "God, you're being ridiculous. Why do you always assume the worst?" The thing is, I wasn't always like that. I didn't assume anything until she gave me reasons to. The next few days were tense. Vanessa acted normal, or at least what passed for normal lately, but my mind wouldn't rest. Every time her phone buzzed, my pulse quickened. Every time she left the house, I wondered where she was really going. I needed clarity, answers, something to confirm or dispel the doubt gnawing at me. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked her phone. It was late, and Vanessa was asleep, her breathing steady and soft. I slipped her phone from the nightstand, my hands trembling. It was locked, of course, but I'd seen her type the passcode enough times to remember. My stomach twisted as the screen lit up. At first glance, there was nothing incriminating. But then I opened her messages with Adam. It started innocently, quick exchanges about her rides and scheduling. But as I scrolled further back, the tone shifted. "Can't stop thinking about the other night," one message read. Another. "When can I see you again?" My breath caught in my throat. I kept scrolling, reading messages I wished I could unread. The casual flirting, the innuendos, and then the explicit messages. There was no mistaking what was happening. The wife I thought I knew, the woman I had built my life around, was having an affair with her rideshare driver. It wasn't just the texts. There were photos too, selfies of Vanessa in outfits I'd never seen her wear, smiling in ways she hadn't smiled around me in months. I felt sick. I returned the phone to the nightstand and sat in the living room for hours, staring at the dark screen of the TV. My thoughts raced, emotions spiraling from anger to sadness to disbelief. How long had this been going on? Did she even feel guilty? Or was I so inconsequential in her life now that she didn't care if I found out? The next morning, Vanessa acted as if everything was fine. She kissed me on the cheek, sipped her coffee, and made plans for the weekend. I watched her, feeling like a stranger had invaded my home. "Do you love me?" I blurted out, the words escaping before I could stop them. She laughed, a light, airy sound. "What kind of question is that?" "Of course I do." But her smile didn't reach her eyes. I needed proof, undeniable evidence that would force her to confront what she was doing. So, I decided to dig deeper. I started checking her phone whenever I got the chance, taking screenshots of the messages and photos, forwarding them to myself. I also began noting her absences, logging the times and places she claimed to be. I hated myself for it, but I had to know the truth. My world had already begun to crack, but what came next shattered it entirely. I was sitting at work, distracted as usual, scrolling through the screenshots of Vanessa's texts with Adam that I'd sent to myself. Every word was like a knife. She told him things she used to tell me, how much she missed him, how much fun she had when they were together. Except now, it wasn't me she was sharing her world with. That afternoon, I got a call from my friend Jake. He was planning a barbecue and wanted to invite Vanessa and me. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it, how normal everything seemed to everyone else. I promised to check our schedules and let him know. When I hung up, something clicked. If I kept pretending, letting her lies go unchallenged, I'd go mad. I had to confront her, or at least catch her in the act. That Friday, Vanessa announced she had a late work meeting and might not be home until well after dinner. She kissed me goodbye, her lips cold and perfunctory, and walked out the door in a red dress I hadn't seen before. I didn't believe her for a second, so I waited 15 minutes, grabbed my car keys, and followed her. The moment I turned the corner onto our street, I saw it. A black SUV idling a few houses down. She opened the door, slid inside, and greeted Adam with a laugh that was far too familiar. My heart pounded as I stayed a few car lengths behind them, praying they wouldn't notice me. They didn't go to a work meeting. Instead, they drove to a quiet spot on the outskirts of town, a dimly lit parking lot near the river. I parked my car at a distance and watched as they sat there, talking and laughing. Then, to my horror, they climbed into the back seat. I didn't need to see more. My chest felt tight, and I could barely breathe. But I forced myself to wait. If I wanted undeniable proof, I had to stay. After what felt like an eternity, the SUV's interior lights flicked on for a moment. I saw their silhouettes, her head thrown back in laughter, or maybe something else, and his hand on her thigh. I snapped a photo. My hands were trembling, but I had to capture it. The proof. I drove home in silence, my mind racing. When she returned hours later, she was glowing. She tossed her keys on the counter, smiled at me, and asked how my night was. I stared at her, barely able to mask my disgust. "It was fine," I said through gritted teeth. "How was your meeting?" She didn't even flinch. "Boring as always." That was it. The final lie. I felt the anger rising in me, but I swallowed it. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not until I figured out my next move. By the time Vanessa left for work the next morning, I was already on a mission. I wasn't going to let her lies unravel me further. It was time to take control. I needed help. I called my oldest friend, Jake, the one who had invited us to the barbecue. He was the kind of person who knew how to keep a level head in a crisis, and I needed someone who could talk me down if I lost mine. When I told him everything, the texts, the late nights, the black SUV, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Damn, man," he finally said. "Are you sure you want to go through with exposing her? This could get messy." "I don't have a choice," I said. "She's not going to stop unless I make her face the truth. I need proof, and I need a plan." Jake suggested hiring a private investigator. At first, I balked at the idea. It seemed too dramatic, too invasive. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. A professional could gather the evidence I needed without me putting myself at risk of a confrontation spiraling out of control. By the end of the day, I had contacted someone. The investigator was professional, discreet, and reassuring. He promised to follow Vanessa and document everything, giving me irrefutable proof of her infidelity. It felt like a weight was being lifted off my shoulders. Meanwhile, I began preparing for the fallout. I pulled up our financial records, noting what was in my name and what was shared. We didn't have kids, which was a relief, but there were still accounts, investments, and property to consider. I didn't want her lies to cost me more than they already had. The hardest part, though, was keeping up the facade at home. Vanessa acted as if nothing was wrong, chatting about work and weekend plans, as if we were still the happy couple we once were. Every laugh, every casual touch made my stomach churn. But I played along, knowing that the more normal I seemed, the less she'd suspect. I even agreed to a dinner out that weekend. She suggested a trendy new place downtown, and I went along with it, smiling and nodding while she picked out her dress. All the while, I wondered if she was texting Adam under the table. When we arrived at the restaurant, I excused myself to the restroom. In truth, I was texting the private investigator, letting him know about her upcoming plans. I didn't know when she'd meet Adam again, but I was determined to be ready. That night, lying in bed beside her, I stared at the ceiling, counting the hours until this charade would end. The weight felt unbearable. Days passed, each one stretching into eternity as I juggled my crumbling emotions and the facade of a normal marriage. Every time Vanessa smiled at me or asked how my day was, I wanted to scream at her, but I didn't. Not yet. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon, I got the call from the private investigator. "We have everything," he said simply. I met him at his office that evening, my heart pounding the entire drive. The investigator had prepared a folder, photos, timestamps, and detailed notes of Vanessa's rendezvous with Adam. There was no ambiguity. She wasn't just cheating, she was brazen about it. The first photo was of her climbing into Adam's SUV. She looked carefree, her face lit up with a smile I hadn't seen in months. Another showed them in a park, sitting close, her hand resting on his leg. But the worst ones were from the parking lot I'd seen before. This time, the investigator had snapped photos of them in the back seat. The windows were fogged, but their silhouettes were unmistakable. As I flipped through the pages, a deep, aching anger settled in my chest. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a lapse in judgment. This was deliberate, repeated, cruel. "I've also got video," the investigator added. He pulled out his laptop and played a short clip. In it, Vanessa leaned into Adam, kissing him with a passion I hadn't felt from her in ages. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to watch. "This should hold up in court if it comes to that," the investigator said, closing the laptop. "How do you want to proceed?" That was the question, wasn't it? Confront her now, with everything laid bare, or wait and build my case even further. I decided on a mix of both. I wanted her to see the proof, to feel the weight of her betrayal. But I also needed to protect myself. I scheduled a meeting with a divorce lawyer the next day, ensuring that I'd be ready for whatever Vanessa might throw at me. At home, I acted like everything was fine. Vanessa didn't suspect a thing. She was chirping about a weekend spa trip she was planning, one I now suspected involved Adam. It was almost laughable, the audacity she had to carry on like this under my nose. The night before I planned to confront her, I barely slept. I lay awake, rehearsing what I would say, imagining her reaction. Would she deny it? Cry? Get angry? I didn't know, but I was ready for all of it. The next day, I called in sick to work. I waited for her to come home, the folder of evidence sitting on the coffee table like a ticking time bomb. When she walked through the door, all smiles and small talk, I took a deep breath and said, "We need to talk." Her smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "What about?" I nodded toward the folder. "About this." Her eyes darted to it, then back to me. I saw the panic flash across her face, but she tried to mask it. "What's this, some kind of surprise?" I didn't answer. I just opened the folder and slid it across the table. Vanessa's eyes lingered on the folder as if it were a ticking bomb, and for her, it probably was. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, trying to keep her composure. "What's this supposed to be?" she asked, her voice dripping with feigned confusion. "Just open it," I said, my tone flat. She hesitated, but then flipped it open. Her eyes darted over the photos, the notes, the evidence so damning it didn't need any explanation. Her face paled, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But then, in true Vanessa fashion, she pivoted. "This is insane," she snapped, slamming the folder shut. "You've been spying on me? Don't even try to turn this around on me," I said, my voice rising. "What you've been doing with Adam, it's all right there. Don't insult me by pretending it's not true." Her expression shifted, the mask slipping just enough for me to see the panic underneath. But then she doubled down. "Adam and I are just friends. This is taken out of context. Do you even hear yourself? You've been stalking me." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Out of context? Vanessa, you're literally making out with him in half these photos. Or did you forget about the back seat of his SUV?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Finally, she blurted, "Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I've been seeing him, but it's not what you think." "Oh, really?" I shot back. "Then what is it, Vanessa? Enlighten me." "It's because of you," she screamed, standing up and pacing the room. "You're so boring. All you ever do is work, and I'm stuck here with nothing." Adam made me feel alive again. The audacity of her words made me feel like I'd been punched in the gut. "So, it's my fault you decided to cheat?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. "Because I work hard to give us a good life?" She crossed her arms, her face flushed with anger. Or guilt, I couldn't tell. "You don't get it. You don't care about me anymore. Adam listens to me. He makes me feel wanted. And screwing him in his car made you feel wanted, huh?" I shot back. "Spare me the excuses, Vanessa." The room fell silent, the tension crackling like static electricity. I could see her wheels turning, trying to find a way to regain control. And then she did what she always did. She went for the dramatic. "I can't believe you're throwing everything we've built away over this," she cried, her voice breaking. "I made a mistake, okay? But I love you, and I want to fix this." I stared at her, stunned by her audacity. "You've got to be kidding me. Do you hear yourself? You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around with another man, and now you want to fix this? There's nothing to fix, Vanessa. We're done." She broke then, tears streaming down her face as she begged and pleaded. But I'd seen enough. I stood up, grabbed the folder, and walked out of the house, her voice trailing behind me like a ghost. Vanessa's sobs echoed through the house as I walked out the door. Part of me felt a twinge of guilt, but it was quickly drowned out by the simmering rage that had been building for weeks. I wasn't the one who betrayed our marriage. She was. I drove aimlessly for a while, the folder of evidence sitting on the passenger seat like a silent companion. Eventually, I parked near a quiet overlook the city lights twinkling in the distance. I stared out into the night, letting the weight of it all settle over me. This was it? The end of us? The next morning, I called the lawyer I'd spoken with earlier. I told him it was time to move forward with the divorce. He assured me that with the evidence I had, things would work in my favor. That was little consolation, though. No matter how smooth the process, divorce meant the collapse of a life I'd spent years building. When I got home later that day, Vanessa was waiting for me. She looked like she hadn't slept, her eyes puffy and red. For a split second, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the texts, the photos, the betrayal. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. "There's nothing left to say," I replied, brushing past her. She grabbed my arm. "Please, just listen to me." I pulled away, spinning to face her. "Why? So you can lie to me some more? I've heard enough, Vanessa." "I'm sorry, okay?" she cried. "I messed up, but I love you. I don't want to lose you." I laughed bitterly. "Love? You call this love? Sneaking around, lying to my face, humiliating me? You got a funny way of showing it." Her face twisted into something between anger and desperation. "You don't understand. I was lonely, and Adam he was a distraction. But he doesn't mean anything. You do." "Stop," I said sharply, my voice cutting through her excuses. "You don't get to make this about me. This is about you and your choices. You destroyed this marriage, not me." Her tears came harder, and she sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. For a moment, I stood there, watching her, feeling like I was staring at a stranger. The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd trusted, was gone. "I'm filing for divorce," I said finally. "You should start thinking about where you're going to live." Her head shot up, her eyes wide with shock. "You can't be serious." "I am," I said firmly. "We're done, Vanessa. You made your bed. Now, lie in it." She started shouting then, a hysterical mix of accusations and pleas. I tuned her out, retreating to the guest room where I'd started sleeping. I locked the door behind me, her voice muffled on the other side. That night, I drafted a message to Adam's wife. I'd found her contact info through some light digging online. I kept it simple, attaching a few key photos and explaining the situation. She deserved to know the truth, just like I had. When I hit send, I felt a strange sense of relief. Vanessa and Adam had made their choices, and now they'd face the consequences. The response came quicker than I expected. Adam's wife, whose name I learned was Rebecca, replied within hours of my message. Her words were short, clipped, and laced with a fury I understood all too well. "Thank you for telling me. I had no idea. Can we talk?" I called her that evening, unsure of what to expect. Her voice was steady, but there was an underlying tremor that betrayed her emotions. She asked me for details, and I shared everything: the photos, the timestamps, the lies. She listened silently, occasionally letting out a quiet, bitter laugh as if to keep herself from breaking down. When I finished, she sighed heavily. "I knew something was off," she admitted. "He's been distant, but I thought we were just going through a rough patch." I didn't think. Her voice cracked, and she took a moment to collect herself. "I'm so sorry," I said, and I meant it. I knew exactly how she felt: blindsided, betrayed, gutted. "Don't be," she said, her voice firm. "They did this to us. Not you, not me. Them." We talked for a long time, sharing the pieces of the puzzle that had been missing for each of us. By the end of the call, we weren't just two strangers bound by heartbreak. We were allies. "I have an idea," Rebecca said, a hint of steel creeping into her tone. "If you're up for it." "What kind of idea?" She paused, and when she spoke again, there was a spark of determination in her voice. "Let's turn the tables on them. Let's show them what it feels like to be cast aside." Her plan was bold, almost theatrical. We would stage a fake romance, flirtatious social media posts, carefully timed appearances together in places we knew our cheating spouses frequented. The goal wasn't just to make them jealous. It was to force them to confront the mess they'd made. At first, I hesitated. It felt petty, juvenile even. But the more I thought about it, the more it appealed to me. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming control, about making them see that their actions had consequences. "I'm in," I said finally. The next few days were a whirlwind of planning. Rebecca and I met in person for the first time at a coffee shop. She was sharp, composed, and just as determined as I was. Together, we crafted the perfect narrative, a budding connection between two people picking up the pieces of their shattered lives. We started small. Rebecca posted a photo of the two of us at the coffee shop, captioned with something innocuous but suggestive, "Grateful for unexpected connections." I shared it on my profile with a simple heart emoji. The reaction was immediate. Within hours, Vanessa stormed into the house, her phone clutched in her hand. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, shoving the screen in my face. I glanced at the post and shrugged. "Oh, that? Just catching up with Rebecca. She's going through the same thing I am. You know, thanks to you and Adam." Her face turned crimson. "This is ridiculous. You're doing this to humiliate me." "No," I said calmly. "You humiliated yourself. I'm just moving on." For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. Vanessa wasn't used to being outmaneuvered, and this was just the beginning. The post continued, carefully curated, deliberately vague. Rebecca and I took a picture while having lunch at a trendy cafe, our plates untouched in mid-conversation. The caption? "Healing with a kindred spirit." The comments poured in, full of speculation, support, and just the right amount of intrigue. Vanessa saw everything. The first few days after the initial post, she vacillated between fury and disbelief. "Are you seriously dating her? This is a joke, right?" she spat one evening. "Why would it be a joke?" I replied coolly. "Rebecca's been a great support through this difficult time. You wouldn't understand." Her mouth opened and closed, her anger barely contained. "This isn't moving on. This is you trying to hurt me." "Maybe it is," I admitted, "but not in the way you think. I'm just showing you what it feels like." Her response was a string of unintelligible mutterings as she stormed out of the room. Meanwhile, Adam wasn't faring any better. Rebecca updated me daily on his reactions. "He's been sulking around the house, asking if I'm seriously seeing you," she said, her voice tinged with amusement. I told him it's none of his business, just like his late-night work trips weren't mine. Our carefully orchestrated charade reached new heights when Rebecca and I ran into Vanessa and Adam at a local park. It wasn't a coincidence. We knew they would be there. Rebecca and I were laughing, walking side by side when we accidentally crossed paths with the pair. Vanessa's jaw dropped. Adam froze. The tension was palpable. "Well, this is awkward," I said, feigning surprise. "Hey, Adam." "Vanessa. Fancy seeing you here." Vanessa glared at me, her face contorted with rage. "You're doing this on purpose." "Doing what?" I asked innocently. "Enjoying a beautiful day with a beautiful friend?" Rebecca smiled sweetly. "Don't mind us. You two have whatever it is you have." Adam's face turned beet red, and Vanessa's fists clenched at her sides. As Rebecca and I walked away, I glanced back and caught Vanessa staring after us, her expression a mix of anger and something else. Regret? Maybe? Jealousy? It didn't matter. The photos and encounters weren't just getting under their skin. They were forcing them to confront the reality of what they'd done. The life they destroyed wasn't just mine and Rebecca's. It was their own too. But something unexpected started happening. The more time Rebecca and I spent together, the more real our connection felt. We weren't just playing a game anymore. We were genuinely enjoying each other's company, finding comfort and understanding in shared pain. One night, after another staged date, Rebecca turned to me as we sat in my car. "This started as a way to get back at them," she said softly. "But I think I actually like spending time with you." I looked at her, startled by her honesty. "Yeah," I said after a moment. "I feel the same. It wasn't planned, and it wasn't forced. But in the wreckage of our lives, something genuine was starting to bloom. What started as a calculated act of revenge had become something I hadn't expected, a genuine connection. Rebecca and I hadn't planned for this, but somewhere between our staged photos and whispered conversations, the lines between pretend and real began to blur. We started texting late into the night, sharing pieces of ourselves that had nothing to do with Vanessa or Adam. I learned about her favorite books, her dream to open a small art gallery someday, and her love of old jazz records. She found out about my passion for woodworking, a hobby I hadn't indulged in years, and encouraged me to start again. One evening, after a long walk through the city, we found ourselves on a park bench overlooking the river. The silence between us was easy, comfortable, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't angry or sad. I was simply content. "Do you think they're watching us right now?" she asked, her voice tinged with amusement. I glanced around, half expecting to see Vanessa or Adam lurking in the shadows. "Wouldn't surprise me," I said. "They're probably losing their minds." Rebecca laughed softly, then turned serious. "This whole thing started as a way to get back at them. But I'm not sure that's what it is for me anymore." I looked at her, and the vulnerability in her eyes made my chest tighten. "Me neither," I admitted. "You've been, I don't know, the one good thing in all of this." She smiled a little shyly. "Same here." I leaned closer, and for a moment, the world faded away. No Vanessa, no Adam, no betrayal. Just us. When our lips met, it felt like the first honest moment I'd had in months. But while Rebecca and I found solace in each other, Vanessa and Adam were spiraling. Vanessa's jealousy boiled over one evening when she burst into the house, her face flushed and her voice shaking. "You're really doing this?" she demanded, waving her phone in my face. "Posting pictures of your little love fest with Rebecca for everyone to see? Why does it bother you?" I shot back, keeping my tone calm. "You've got Adam, don't you?" Her face twisted with rage. "This is different. You're doing this to hurt me." I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "And what exactly do you think you were doing with Adam? Because it sure as hell wasn't just hurting me. You wrecked everything we built together." She opened her mouth, then closed it again, at a loss for words. For once, I had the upper hand. Meanwhile, Rebecca told me Adam wasn't handling things much better. "He's been trying to win me back," she said during one of our late-night talks. "Showing up with flowers, apologizing, saying he made a mistake." "And what do you tell him?" I asked. She smirked. "That he should have thought about that before crawling into the back seat with Vanessa." Adam and Vanessa's worlds were crumbling, and they had no one to blame but themselves. Every social media post Rebecca and I shared, every accidental run-in at the grocery store, chipped away at their carefully constructed bubble of denial. But for Rebecca and me, the fake romance was quickly becoming the real thing. What had started as a way to reclaim our power over our cheating spouses had turned into something unexpected and deeply meaningful. Vanessa's fury reached a boiling point one night. She burst into the house after another post Rebecca and I shared, a picture of us at a cozy wine bar, laughing over a bottle of Merlot. I'd captioned it simply, "Sometimes, second chances come when you least expect them." Her face was a mix of anger, pain, and desperation. "I don't deserve this," she shouted, her voice cracking. "You're doing this to punish me. Haven't you had enough?" I stood my ground. "You don't get to play the victim, Vanessa. You made your choices. I'm just moving on." "Moving on," she spat. "You're flaunting this thing with Rebecca like it's some kind of game." "It stopped being a game a long time ago," I said quietly. "Rebecca and we're real. Something you and I haven't been in years." Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, I saw genuine regret. But it was too late. "I thought we could fix this," she whispered. "We can't," I said firmly. "You broke us. And honestly, I'm glad you did." Her face crumpled, and she stormed out. The door slammed behind her, leaving the house in silence. Meanwhile, Rebecca had her own confrontation with Adam. He showed up at her door one evening, flowers in hand, and a well-rehearsed apology on his lips. But Rebecca wasn't having it. "You're only here because you can't stand the idea of me being happy without you," she told him, her voice steady and cold. "Well, guess what? I am. And it's not because of you. It's in spite of you." Adam left, defeated. And from what Rebecca told me, that was the last she saw of him. The divorce proceedings with Vanessa went as smoothly as I could have hoped. Thanks to the evidence I'd gathered, she didn't fight me on much. We split the house, the accounts, and our belongings. By the time it was all finalized, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Rebecca and I didn't rush into anything official, but we continued to spend time together, letting our connection deepen naturally. The more we talked, laughed, and simply existed in each other's presence, the more I realized how much better my life had become since leaving Vanessa. One evening, we found ourselves back at the park bench, overlooking the river. The same spot where everything had started to feel real. Rebecca leaned her head on my shoulder, and I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. "Do you ever think about them?" she asked softly. "Not as much anymore," I admitted. "But when I do, I don't feel anger, just relief. They did us a favor." She nodded, her fingers lacing through mine. "It's funny, isn't it? How something so awful can lead to something so good." I kissed the top of her head, smiling. "Yeah, it is." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Hope. Not just for Rebecca and me, but for myself. For a future that felt brighter than I ever thought possible. Quiet rhythm of each other's company. Or so I thought.